The great hall of Ebonvale had never felt so cold. Isolara walked through the parted crowd in the white gown they had sent to her chambers that morning. The fabric whispered against the stone floor with each step, delicate as a death shroud. She had been told it was for a blessing ceremony, a celebration of her bond with Alpha Valdric on the second anniversary of their union. She had believed them. 1,000 candles blazed from wrought iron chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across faces she had come to know over 2 years as Luna of the most powerful pack in 5 territories. Council members, elders, warriors who had bowed to her in the corridors, servants who had brought her morning tea and evening meals. None of them would meet her eyes. Isolara's wolf stirred beneath her skin, hackles rising at the wrongness saturating the air. The whispers that had followed her entrance had fallen silent, replaced by a thickness that pressed against her chest like a hand slowly closing around her throat. Something was wrong. She searched for Valdric on the raised dais at the far end of the hall, her mate, her husband. The man who had claimed her beneath a winter moon and sworn she was the only woman his wolf would ever recognize. He stood rigid in ceremonial black, his dark hair swept back from a face that might have been carved from mountain granite. Those steel-gray eyes that had once softened when they found hers across a crowded room now stared at a fixed point above her head. He would not look at her. And beside him, draped in a gown of silver moonlight that made Isolara's white dress look like a servant's rags, stood Vailoria of House Solvain. Isolara's step faltered. Vailoria's lips curved into a smile of exquisite triumph. The daughter of the most powerful noble house in Ebonvale, whose family had opposed Isolara's union with the Alpha from the very beginning. Who had whispered in council meetings that a Luna with no noble blood would weaken the pack? Who had watched and waited for 2 years with the patience of a spider tending her web? Why was she standing beside Valdric on the dais? Isolara's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. She had woken that morning with a strange flutter deep in her core, a sensation she had never felt before. Her courses were late, but that happened sometimes when she was stressed. It meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. Isolara of Ebonvale, the High Elder intoned, his ancient voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk, approached the dais. Her feet carried her forward despite the screaming of her instincts. 2 years of training as Luna had taught her to maintain composure, to never show weakness before the pack. But with each step, she felt the ground crumbling beneath her. The elder's next words shattered what remained. "We gather tonight for the sacred rite of severance." The word struck Isolara like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled. Her breath stopped. Severance. The ritual dissolution of a mate bond. The most shameful fate a Luna could suffer. To be publicly declared unworthy and cast aside before the entire pack. This was not a blessing. This was an execution. And she had walked into it wearing the color of surrender, believing herself loved. Isolara could not move. The faces around her blurred into a sea of muted colors as the High Elder's voice droned on, each word another nail driven into her chest. For 2 years, the Luna has failed to produce an heir. The bloodline of the Alpha remains without continuation. The pack's future stands in jeopardy. Failed. The word echoed in her skull. She had not failed. She had prayed. She had visited every healer, drunk every bitter tea, and performed every fertility ritual the old wolves prescribed. She had wept in private when her courses came month after month, believing her body was betraying the man she loved. The examination conducted by the House Solvain healers has confirmed what many suspected. The elder's voice carried no emotion. The Luna is barren, incapable of bearing children, unfit to continue as mate to the Alpha King. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Isolara's gaze snapped to Valdric. Surely he would stop this. Surely he would step forward and declare it a mistake, a misunderstanding. anything but this public destruction of everything they had built. He did not move. "Valdric," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Please." For one heartbeat, his gray eyes flickered to hers. She saw something there. A flash of something that might have been pain, or regret, or the ghost of the man who had once held her through thunderstorms and promised that nothing would ever tear them apart. Then it was gone. "The examination was thorough," Valdric said, and his voice was the voice of a stranger, cold, final. "The healers found no possibility of conception. My duty to the pack must come before personal attachments." Personal attachments. 2 years of marriage. 2 years of sharing his bed, his burdens, his secret fears whispered in the darkness. 2 years of building a life she thought would last forever. Reduced to a personal attachment. "The bond will now be severed," the elder announced. "Valdric, Alpha of Ebonvale, do you reject this woman as your mate?" The hall held its breath. Isolara stared at the man she loved, willing him to remember. The clearing where they had first kissed. The night he had marked her, his teeth sinking into her shoulder as he growled that she was his. Only his. Forever his. The morning after, when he had traced the mark with trembling fingers and called her his miracle. "I reject her," Valdric said. The mark on Isolara's shoulder exploded with agony. She cried out, her hand flying to the claiming bite as fire raced through her veins. The bond, that golden thread she had felt connecting her to him since the night he claimed her, was being torn apart fiber by fiber. Through the haze of pain, she heard the elder speak again. "And do you, Valdric, Alpha of Ebonvale, accept Valoria of House Solvain as your new mate and Luna?" No, this could not be happening. "I accept her." The crowd erupted. Cheers and howls of approval shook the ancient rafters. House Solvain had won. The noble bloodline they had always wanted on the throne was finally within reach, and Isolara stood alone in the center of it all, her mark burning, her bond shattering, her entire world collapsing around her, while her replacement smiled from the dais like a cat that had finally caught its prey. Valoria's voice cut through the celebration, pitched to Carrie. "Remove the barren one from the hall. Her presence offends the spirits of fertility we must invoke for the new union." Guards moved toward Isolara, and something inside her, something that had survived every humiliation, every whispered insult, every month of desperate prayers, finally broke. But breaking was not the same as surrender. Isolara ran, not away from the guards, past them. Through the servants' corridor she had memorized during 2 years as Luna, learning every shadow and secret passage in case she ever needed to escape political enemies. She had never imagined the enemy would be her own mate. The mark on her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, the severed bond leaving a wound that felt physical, fatal. But she did not stop. Could not stop. If she stopped, she would collapse, and if she collapsed, they would find her weeping on the stones like the broken thing Valoria wanted her to be. She would not give them that satisfaction. Her chambers were empty when she reached them. Servants already cleared out, no doubt informed of her disgrace before she had even entered the great hall. Isolara grabbed what she could carry, a worn cloak, a pouch of coins she had saved from her Luna's allowance. Her mother's ring, the only thing she had left of a family that had died in the border wars. Everything else, the gowns, the jewels, the gilded cage of a life she had thought was happiness, she left behind. The flutter came again as she paused at the window. That strange sensation deep in her belly, stronger now, almost like a pulse. No, she could not think about that, could not let herself hope. The healers had declared her barren. Valdric had accepted their word without question. Whatever she felt was grief given physical form. Nothing more. Isolara slipped through the servants' gate as the celebration howls echoed across the capital. Torches blazed throughout the city as the people of Ebonvale toasted their new Luna, the proper Luna, with noble blood and a fertile womb, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. No one noticed a cloaked figure disappearing into the winter forest. No one cared. She walked until her legs gave out, then stumbled into a frozen ravine where the wind could not reach her. There, finally, surrounded by darkness and the distant howling of wolves that would never again be her pack, Isolara allowed herself to break. The sobs came without sound. She had learned long ago that weeping was only safe if no one could hear. But as she curled around herself in the frozen darkness, her hand pressed against her stomach. She felt it again. That flutter. Stronger. Almost like an answer. And hundreds of miles away, in the great hall of Ebonvale, Valdric stood beside his new Luna with a goblet of ceremonial wine in his hand, and felt something tear through his chest like a blade. He gasped, the goblet slipping from his fingers. "My love?" Valoria's voice was honey over poison. "Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong. But when Valdric tried to remember why, tried to grasp the feeling that clawed at the edges of his consciousness, he found only fog. And in the shadows of his mind, something that had been caged for months howled with grief. 5 years. Isolara had counted every one of them in sleepless nights, in first steps and first words, in the slow healing of a wound that would never fully close. The village of Thornhallow existed on no official map. Nestled in the mist-shrouded valleys beyond the Greymarch Mountains, it was a haven for those who wished to disappear. Exiles, refugees, wolves without packs. The kind of place where questions were considered rude, and the past was a door best left closed. It was here that Isolara had rebuilt herself from ashes. "Mama! Kaelin won't share the honey cakes." The voice belonged to Seraphine, who stood in the doorway of their small cottage with her arms crossed and her silver-gray eyes alight with 4-year-old indignation. She had her father's coloring, that dark hair, those storm-cloud eyes, but her spirit was entirely her own. "I caught the bee that made the honey," Kaelin countered from behind her, his voice carrying the measured logic he applied to everything. Where his sister was fire, he was calculation. 2 sides of the same coin, twins. The healers of House Solvane had declared Isolara barren, incapable of bearing children. 3 months after her exile, she had given birth to 2. "Split them evenly," Isolara called from her workbench, where she was grinding dried moon petal into powder. "Or neither of you gets any." Grumbling negotiation ensued. A moment later, peace was restored, at least temporarily. Isolara allowed herself a small smile as she returned to her work. She had become the village healer, a role that earned her enough coin for food and clothing and the small comforts that made their cottage feel like home. It was a quiet life, a safe life, a life built on the ruins of everything she had lost. The mark on her shoulder twinged. Isolara's hand paused over the mortar. 5 years, and the claiming bite still had not fully faded. It should have vanished within months of the severance. Every teaching said so. Instead, it remained as a pale scar that ached when storms approached and burned when she dreamed of gray eyes and broken promises. She tried not to think about what that meant. A low rumble came from the shadows beneath the window. "Easy," Isolara murmured. The darkness shifted, and 2 eyes opened within it. Eyes that glowed like molten amber, ancient and knowing. The creature that emerged was neither fully wolf nor fully shadow, but something between. Something that had found Isolara on the worst night of her exile, when she had collapsed in a frozen ravine and prayed for death. The villagers called it a shadow beast, a creature of legend, bonded to no pack, loyal to no alpha. It had chosen her, and it had never left her side since. "Kael is restless," Seraphine observed, appearing at her mother's elbow. The child showed no fear of the creature, never had. From the moment the twins had been born, the shadow beast had watched over them with a devotion that bordered on worship. Kale is always restless, Kaelin added, joining his sister. Something's coming, he told me. Isolara's blood chilled. Told you how? Kaelin shrugged, his gray eyes distant. The same way he always does, in the quiet place behind my thoughts. The shadow beast's amber gaze met Isolara's, and in that gaze, she saw warning. The traders arrived with the morning fog. Isolara watched them from her window as they set up their wares in the village square. Fabrics, spices, tools, and the currency that mattered most in isolated places. Information. She should stay inside, should keep her head down, and her children close and wait for the strangers to move on. But Kale had been pacing since dawn, and Kaelin had woken screaming from a nightmare he refused to describe. Something was coming. She needed to know what. Stay with Kale, she told the twins. Do not leave the cottage. The shadow beast curled around her children like a living barrier, its amber eyes promising violence to anything that threatened them. Isolara pulled her worn cloak tight and stepped into the mist. The traders were from the eastern territories. She could tell by their accents, the style of their clothing, the wary way they watched the tree line as if expecting attack. They had traveled far, and they had news to sell. What word from beyond the mountains? Isolara asked, keeping her voice casual as she examined a bundle of dried herbs she did not need. The eldest trader, a weathered man with a missing ear, shook his head grimly. Dark times in Ebenvale, mistress. Dark times indeed. Isolara's heart stuttered. Ebenvale? The Alpha's pack is crumbling. 5 years now since he took his new Luna, and still no heir. The she-wolf is barren as salt flats, though House Solvane blames everything from curses to poisoned wells. The trader spat. Meanwhile, the Alpha himself has gone half mad. Isolara forced her expression to remain neutral. Mad how? Wanders the borderlands alone, neglects his duties. His wolf, they say, has been fighting for dominance since the night of his mating ceremony. Some claim they've heard him howling names in his sleep. The trader leaned closer. And there's worse. He's started searching for someone. A woman. Sent wolves to every corner of the realm, asking questions, hunting for traces. The ground tilted beneath Isolara's feet. What woman? No one knows. Some say a lost sister. Others say a witch who cursed him. But the reward he's offering? The trader whistled low. 20,000 gold pieces. Enough to buy a territory. 20,000. For 5 years, Isolara had believed Valdric had discarded her without a second thought, had moved on to his noble bride and forgotten the woman he had called Barren. Why would a man who rejected her offer a fortune to find her? Mama? The voice came from behind her. Small. Frightened. Isolara spun to find Seraphine standing at the edge of the square, her silver eyes wide with terror. Seraphine, I told you to stay. Kale made me come. The girl's voice trembled. He says they're here. The wolves from the bad place. They found us. The trader's face went pale, and from the mist-shrouded tree line, 3 massive wolves emerged with eyes that glowed like dying embers. House Solvane had finally caught her scent. Isolara's body moved before her mind caught up. She swept Seraphine into her arms and ran, her healer's legs carrying her faster than she had moved in years. Behind her, the village erupted into chaos. Screams, snarls, the crash of overturned market stalls. But the Solvane wolves were not attacking the villagers. They were herding them aside, clearing a path. Isolara burst through her cottage door to find Kaelin pressed against Kale's massive flank, his small face pale but determined. Mama, Kale says we have to run. There's a way through the mountain caves. We cannot outrun them. Isolara set Seraphine down, her mind racing. Kale, can you hold them? The shadow beast rose to its full height, and the cottage suddenly felt very small. Darkness rippled around its form like living smoke. When it opened its jaws, the growl that emerged shook dust from the rafters. It could hold them. For a time. "Mama?" Kaelin said quietly. "There's another wolf. Not with the bad ones. He's trying to reach us." Before Isolara could respond, the cottage door exploded inward, but it was not a Solvane wolf who stepped through. The man was tall, gray-haired, with a warrior's build and a face she had never forgotten. Corvain, Valdric's former beta, who had been stripped of his rank the same night Isolara had been cast out. "My Luna." He dropped to one knee, breathing hard. "Thank the spirits I found you first." "I am no one's Luna," Isolara said coldly, "and you have 5 seconds to explain before I let Kale tear out your throat." The shadow beast's growl intensified. The severance was a lie. Corvain's words tumbled out in desperate haste. All of it. The examination, the Barren diagnosis. House Solvane fabricated everything. They drugged Valdric for months before the ceremony, suppressing his wolf, clouding his mind. He never truly rejected you. The bond was never meant to break. The world stopped. "That's impossible," Isolara breathed. "I felt it tear. You felt what they wanted you to feel. Solvane healers are trained in the old arts. Pain manipulation, bond masking. They made you believe the severance was complete while keeping the true bond intact, but dormant." Corvain's eyes were haunted. "They needed you gone, but they could not risk killing you outright. Aluna's death would have driven Valdric's wolf permanently feral, so they broke you with shame instead, confident you would disappear." Isolara's hand flew to her shoulder. The mark that had never faded. "The bond is still alive. Wounded, suppressed, but alive." Corvain rose to his feet. When the drugs finally cleared from Valdric's system, it took 3 years. The first thing he did was howl your name. He has been searching ever since, fighting his own counsel, tearing apart every lie House Solvane built. And when he discovered the truth about the false examination— "What truth?" Corvain's gaze dropped to Kaelin and Seraphine, who stood watching with their father's gray eyes. "The truth that you were never barren at all, that you were already carrying his heirs when they cast you out." The cottage fell silent. Isolara looked at her children, her miracles. Born in exile, raised in hiding, never knowing the father who should have held them from their first breath. He knows about the twins. He suspects. The bond tells him something survived, something of his blood. Corvain's voice cracked. "My Luna, Valdric is coming. He is less than a day behind me, but House Solvane knows too. They sent those wolves to kill you before he arrives. They cannot let him find you, cannot let him see the proof of their deception." A howl split the air outside, close, hunting. "How many?" Isolara demanded. "A dozen. Trained killers. Valoria herself leads them. 12 wolves against 1 shadow beast, 1 disgraced beta, and a healer with 2 4-year-olds. Impossible odds. But Isolara had survived impossible before. "Kale," she said quietly. The shadow beast turned its ancient eyes toward her. "It's time to show them what we became in their absence." The darkness around Kale deepened, spread. The cottage walls groaned as shadows peeled away from every corner, every crevice, drawn toward the creature like iron to lodestone. And in the distance, racing through the mountain passes with his wolf howling beneath his skin, Valdric felt the bond he had thought destroyed suddenly blaze to life. She was alive, his mate was alive, and someone was trying to take her from him again. The first wolf came through the window. Isolara shoved the twins behind her as glass exploded across the cottage floor. Kale intercepted the attacker mid-leap, jaws closing around its throat with a sound that would haunt her nightmares. The wolf crumpled, but 2 more were already forcing through the shattered frame. "The back door!" Corvain shouted, shifting into his wolf form, a graying beast still powerful despite his years. He crashed into the attackers, buying seconds they could not afford to waste. Isolara grabbed her children and ran. The village of Thornhallow had become a battlefield. Cottages burned, screams echoed through the mist. The Solvane wolves moved with military precision, cutting off escape routes, driving the villagers toward the center square like sheep. But they were not interested in villagers. Every amber eye turned toward Isolara and her children. "Mama," Kalen said, his voice eerily calm. "Kale says to go left. There's a gap." Isolara did not question it. She veered left, ducking between two burning structures, and found herself in a narrow alley that led toward the forest edge. Freedom, safety, escape. A wolf dropped from the rooftop above, blocking their path. This one was different. Larger, its coat gleaming silver-white, its eyes cold with calculated malice. And when it shifted, the woman who emerged wore a smile that had haunted Isolara's nightmares for 5 years. Valoria. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" The false Luna's voice dripped with poisoned honey. 5 years I've waited for this moment. 5 years of watching my mate waste away, howling for a ghost, while I played the patient wife. "He was never your mate," Isolara said, pushing the twins further behind her. "The bond was a lie. Everything was a lie. Lies build empires, little healer." Valoria's smile widened, "And dead women tell no truths." She lunged. Isolara had no time to react, no time to run. She could only wrap her body around her children and pray that Kale would reach them in time. The impact never came. A roar split the night. Not the shadow beast's rumble, but something rawer, wilder. A sound of pure, devastating fury that shook the ground beneath their feet. A massive black wolf exploded from the mist, slamming into Valoria with force enough to send her crashing through the wall of a nearby cottage. The wolf stood over her fallen form, hackles raised, teeth bared, eyes burning with golden fire that seemed to illuminate the entire alley. Those eyes turned toward Isolara. And even after 5 years, even after everything, she knew them instantly. Valdric. Time fractured into frozen shards. Isolara stared at the wolf who had once been her mate, her husband, her entire world. He was larger than she remembered, or perhaps her memory had softened him. His black fur was streaked with silver now, battle scars mapping his body like a history of violence, and his eyes, those golden eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness, burned with something that teetered between salvation and destruction. Valoria staggered to her feet, blood streaming from a gash on her temple. "Valdric, darling." Her voice was strained but calculating. "I found her, just as I promised. I was bringing her back to you." The alpha's growl cut her off. Low. Dangerous. A sound that promised death. He shifted. The man who emerged from the wolf was a ruin of the king Isolara had known. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, with a wildness in his features that spoke of years spent at war with his own mind. His gaze swept over her, drinking in every detail as if he were dying of thirst and she was water. Then his eyes dropped to the children pressed against her legs. Valdric stopped breathing. Kalen stared back at him with gray eyes identical to his own. Seraphine clutched her mother's cloak, her expression fierce despite her trembling. "Isolara." Her name emerged from his throat like a prayer, like a wound, like something torn from the deepest part of his soul. "Tell me, please, tell me they're yours," she said, and the word broke something open in his face. "They've always been yours." A sound escaped Valdric, half sob, half howl. He took a step toward them, then stopped, as if afraid they would disappear if he moved too quickly. "I didn't know." His voice cracked. "I swear on every spirit I didn't know. They told me you were Barren. They told me the bond had dissolved. I believed. You believed the people who destroyed us." I was drugged, manipulated. My wolf was caged inside my own body for 3 years while they— He broke off, anguish contorting his features. There is no excuse. I should have known, should have felt it, should have fought harder. Yes, Isolara said quietly. You should have. A rumble of warning came from behind her. Kyle emerged from the shadows, positioning himself between the alpha and his family. The shadow beast's form had grown larger, darker, fed by the violence of the night. Its amber eyes fixed on Valdric with ancient, measuring intelligence. Valdric's wolf surged forward at the sight, a snarl building in his chest. Another predator near his mate, his children. Stop! Isolara's voice cracked like a whip. Kale protected us when you could not. He has more right to stand beside me than you do. The words landed like physical blows. Valdric flinched, but he did not retreat. You're right, he said hoarsely. You're right, and I will spend the rest of my existence earning back what I lost. But right now, Valoria's wolves are regrouping. More are coming. We need to move. As if summoned by his words, howls rose from multiple directions, coordinated, closing in. How many? Isolara demanded. Enough to overwhelm us if we stay. Valdric's jaw tightened. But I have loyal wolves waiting at the mountain pass. If we can reach them. The children cannot run that far. Then I will carry them myself. Before Isolara could respond, Seraphine stepped forward. Her small face was set with determination that seemed far too old for 4 years. Kel can take us, she announced. He's done it before. Through the shadow paths. Valdric's brow furrowed. Shadow paths? But Isolara understood. She had seen Kale do it once, during a winter storm that should have killed them all, melting into darkness and emerging miles away. Can you carry all of us? She asked the shadow beast. Kale's response was not words, but feeling. A pulse of certainty that resonated through the bond they shared. He could, but it would cost him. Do it, Isolara said. The shadows swallowed them whole. They emerged in a cave high in the Greymarch Mountains, gasping and shivering as reality reassembled around them. Kale collapsed immediately, his massive form shrinking, dimming. Seraphine and Kaelin ran to him, their small hands pressing against his shadowy fur. He's weak, Kaelin reported, his gray eyes worried. He needs to rest. He saved us. Isolara knelt beside the shadow beast, stroking the darkness that rippled beneath her fingers. Rest now, old friend. You've done enough. Kale's amber eyes flickered once, then closed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Valdric stood at the cave entrance, his back to them, and every line of his body rigid with tension. Beyond him, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. The loyal wolves, Isolara said flatly. Where are they? Coming. Corvain sent word before the attack. Valdric's voice was hollow. They'll find us by midday. And until then? Until then, we wait. Isolara laughed bitterly. Wait. That's your plan. The same thing I did for 5 years while you played husband to the woman who orchestrated my destruction. Valdric spun to face her, and she saw tears streaming down his face. You think I played anything? The words tore from him like shrapnel. You think a single day passed when my wolf wasn't screaming inside a cage of drugs and lies? You think I didn't wake every night with your name on my lips, not knowing why, feeling like half my soul had been carved out with a dull blade? You rejected me in front of the entire pack. I was not myself. Valdric's roar echoed off the stone walls. My mind was a prison. My wolf was silenced. Everything I felt for you was locked away where I couldn't reach it. And when I finally broke free, when the drugs cleared and I remembered everything. His voice shattered. I ran to your chambers. Do you know what I found? Empty. Your clothes gone, your scent fading, and no one, not a single person, would tell me where you had gone. Isolara's chest heaved. Because I fled like a wounded animal. Because the man I loved called me Barren and chose another woman while I carried his children in my womb. Valdric made a wounded sound. I didn't know. Isolara. I swear on my life, I didn't know about the pregnancy. If you had what? Fought harder? Questioned the diagnosis? Trusted your bond with me instead of the word of your enemies? Yes. The admission was barely a whisper. All of that. Everything. I failed you in ways I can never undo, and I am not asking for forgiveness I haven't earned. He crossed the cave toward her, stopping only when he was close enough to touch. But I am asking for a chance, to know my children, to prove that the man you loved is still in here, buried under years of manipulation and grief. His hand reached toward her face, trembling, to show you that I never stopped being yours, even when I didn't remember why. Isolara's resolve wavered. 5 years of rage. 5 years of building walls to protect the broken pieces of her heart. 5 years of teaching herself that she needed no one, loved no one, would never again trust anyone with the vulnerable parts of herself. But his eyes, those gray eyes that lived in her children's faces, the eyes she had fallen in love with under a winter moon, when he had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in any world. Mama! Seraphine's small voice broke through the tension. Isolara turned to find both twins watching them with solemn expressions. Is he really our papa? Kaelin asked quietly. The one you cry about when you think we're sleeping? Isolara's breath caught. Valdric dropped to his knees, bringing himself to the children's level. His hands shook as he reached toward them, stopping just short of contact. I am, he said hoarsely, and I am so sorry I wasn't there, that I missed your first steps, your first words, your first everything. But if you'll let me, if your mother will let me, I would like to be there for everything that comes next. Seraphine studied him with her mother's assessing gaze. Then she stepped forward and placed her small hand against his cheek. You feel sad, she announced, deep down sad. But there's something else too. Her brow furrowed. Something that feels like Mama. The bond. Even damaged, even suppressed, the children could sense it. Kaelin moved to stand beside his sister. Kael says you're not lying. He says your wolf has been crying for a long time. Valdric's composure finally broke. He gathered both children against his chest, great racking sobs shaking his body as he held the family he had never known he had. And Isolara, watching the father of her children weep with joy and grief intertwined, felt the first crack form in the walls around her heart. I haven't forgiven you, she said quietly. Valdric looked up at her over the twins' heads, his face ravaged but hopeful. But I am willing to try. He extended one hand toward her, an invitation, not a demand. After a long moment, Isolara took it. The loyal wolves arrived at midday, just as Valdric had promised. 20 warriors who had refused to bow to House Solvain's corruption, led by a fierce she-wolf named Thessaly, who dropped to one knee the moment she saw Isolara. My Luna, Thessaly said, we never believed the lies. We have waited 5 years for this day. The words stirred something Isolara had thought long dead. Not just the title, she had abandoned any claim to that the night she fled, but the recognition. The acknowledgement that she had mattered, that her absence had left a wound in people beyond herself. Rise, she said softly. We have a long journey ahead. They traveled through the mountain passes, avoiding the main roads where Valoria's wolves would be hunting. Kael had recovered enough to walk, though he stayed close to the twins, his shadowy form a constant guardian. The loyal wolves gave the shadow beast a wide berth, their instincts screaming warnings that their discipline barely contained. They fear him, Valdric observed, falling into step beside Isolara. They should. He answers to no pack. No alpha. She paused. Only to me and the children. How did you bond with him? The question carried no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Isolara was quiet for a long moment, watching Seraphine ride on Kale's back, while Kaelin walked alongside, one hand buried in shadow fur. I was dying, she finally said. The night I fled, I made it as far as the Grey March foothills before the cold, and the grief became too much. I collapsed in a ravine, certain I would never rise. Valdric's jaw tightened. Kale found me. Or perhaps he had always been waiting there, and I was simply the first person broken enough to see him. She shrugged. He kept me warm through the night, guided me to Thornhallow, stayed when he had no reason to stay. He recognized something in you. Perhaps. Or perhaps he recognized the children I didn't yet know I carried. Isolara glanced at Valdric. They can communicate with him. Kaelin especially. It's as if the bond I share with Kale flows through them too. Valdric processed this in silence. Then, they are remarkable. Both of them. They are survivors, like their mother. The words carried no bitterness, simply truth. As they descended toward the Ebenvale Valley, Valdric began to share pieces of his own 5 years. The slow clearing of the drugs from his system. The dawning horror as memories resurfaced. The confrontation with House Solvain that had nearly sparked civil war. Valoria played the victim beautifully, he said grimly, claimed I had gone mad, that my obsession with finding you was proof of instability. Half the council believed her. And the other half? Supported me in secret, waited for proof that would expose the Solvain conspiracy. His expression darkened. Proof I could never find because they had hidden their tracks too well. Until now. Until now. The twins, Isolara. They are living proof that the Barren diagnosis was false, that everything House Solvain built was founded on lies. Isolara nodded slowly. So my children become weapons in a political war. No. Valdric stopped walking, turning to face her. They become protected heirs of Ebenvale, loved by their father and recognized by the pack. The politics are secondary. Your safety, all 3 of you, comes first. Before she could respond, a scout came running from ahead, his face pale with alarm. My king, there's smoke rising from the capital. Valdric's expression hardened. How much smoke? Enough to suggest half the city is burning. They crested the final ridge together, and Isolara's breath stopped. Ebenvale sprawled across the valley below, its ancient spires reaching toward a sky choked with black smoke. Fires burned throughout the merchant quarter. The distant sound of screaming reached them on the wind, and flying above the castle gates, replacing the royal crest Isolara remembered, was the silver serpent banner of House Solvain. No, Valdric breathed. Valoria, Thessaly spat. She must have returned ahead of us, declared you dead or mad, seized control while the loyal wolves were gone. The people, Isolara said. The servants, the guards who stayed faithful. A scout spoke grimly. Hostages, my lady. Word is spreading through the refugee camps. House Solvain has gathered everyone who refused to swear loyalty to the new regime, there to be executed at sunset as traitors. Sunset. 3 hours away. How many hostages? Valdric demanded. Over 100, including... The scout hesitated. Including the healers from the old Luna's household, the ones who tried to tell the truth about the examination. Isolara's blood turned to ice. The healers who had known. Who had perhaps tried to expose the lie and been silenced for it. People who might have saved her 5 years of exile if they had only been heard. We cannot let them die, she said. Valdric's hands clenched into fists. We are 20 wolves against an occupied city. Valoria will have hundreds of fighters loyal to House Solvain. Then we find another way in? Kale's rumble drew everyone's attention. The shadow beast had risen to his full height, amber eyes fixed on the burning city below. And in Isolara's mind, she felt his offer. The shadow paths. One more time. Absolutely not. Valdrick's voice was iron. You are not going into that city alone. I won't be alone. Kale can take me directly into the castle, past the walls, past the guards, straight to wherever they're holding the hostages. And then what? You face Valoria and her entire army by yourself? I face her long enough for you to lead the loyal wolves through the main gates. Isolara held his gaze steadily. She wants me, Valdrick. She's always wanted me. The obstacle between her and legitimacy. If I offer myself as a distraction, you offer yourself as a sacrifice. I offer myself as bait. There's a difference. Valdrick grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost painful. I just found you again. After 5 years of believing I had lost everything, my mate, my bond, my sanity, I finally have you back. I cannot watch you walk into a trap. And I cannot watch 100 innocent people die because I was too afraid to act. Isolara placed her hands over his. This is who I am, Valdrick. This is who I have always been. The woman who ran was broken by grief and betrayal. The woman standing before you now was forged in exile, and she does not abandon people who need her. Valdrick's resolve wavered. She could see it in his eyes, the war between his need to protect her and his recognition of the person she had become. Mama is strong, Kaelin said quietly from beside Kale. Stronger than the bad wolves. Kale knows it. So do I. We'll be okay, Papa. Seraphine's use of the title made Valdrick flinch with emotion. Kale will protect her. And will protect Kale. Isolara frowned. You two are staying here with your father. No. Kaelin's gray eyes, Valdrick's eyes, met hers with unsettling certainty. We're connected to Kale. If he takes you through the shadows alone, it will break him. But if we go too, we can feed him strength. Keep him whole. The children speak truth, Thessaly said reluctantly. Shadow beasts bond in triads when they can. The 3 of them together might be able to do what would kill Kale alone. Valdrick looked between his children and their mother, his expression agonized. If anything happens to them, then you burn House Solvane to ashes, Isolara finished. But nothing will happen. Not while Kale and I draw breath. She kissed him then, fierce, desperate, a promise and a farewell wrapped together. When she pulled back, his eyes were molten gold, his wolf surging beneath the surface. 1 hour, he growled. Create your distraction, free the hostages, then get out. I will tear down those gates myself if I have to. 1 hour, she agreed. The shadows rose to swallow them. The castle dungeon stank of fear and blood. Isolara materialized from darkness with Kale at her side, and her children clutching her cloak. The shadow beast was diminished, his form flickering, but the twins pressed against him with closed eyes, their small faces tight with concentration, feeding him strength. Just as Kaelin had promised. Mama, Seraphine whispered. There are people crying. That way. Isolara followed her daughter's pointing finger down a torch-lit corridor. The sounds of weeping grew louder as they approached, and beneath it, the harsh laughter of guards. 3 Solvane wolves stood before a massive iron gate, beyond which dozens of prisoners huddled in chains. Healers, servants, guards, everyone who had refused to accept the false Luna's rule. Isolara did not give them time to raise an alarm. Kyle struck from the shadows like black lightning, taking 2 of the guards down before they could shift. The 3rd managed one terrified howl before Isolara's hand closed around his throat. The keys, she said calmly. Now. The prisoners' release took precious minutes. Many were too weak to walk, supporting each other as Isolara directed them toward the servant tunnels that would lead them out of the castle. Go, she commanded. The Alpha's wolves will meet you at the eastern gate. My lady, an elderly healer gasped, grasping her hand. We tried to tell them. 5 years ago, We tried to tell the council that the examination was falsified. But House Sylvain? I know. Isolara squeezed the woman's fingers. Justice is coming, but first, you need to survive. Go. The hostages fled. But as the last of them disappeared into the tunnels, a slow clapping echoed through the dungeon. Touching. Truly touching. Valoria emerged from the darkness at the far end of the corridor. She was not alone. A dozen elite Solvane warriors flanked her, their eyes gleaming with bloodlust. I knew you would come for them. The false Luna's smile was a razor's edge. Predictable as always, little healer. You never could resist playing savior. And you never could resist underestimating me. Underestimate you? Valoria laughed. I destroyed you. I took your mate, your home, your identity. For 5 years you were nothing, a ghost story, a cautionary tale. And now you crawl back, thinking what? That you can reclaim what I've built? I don't want anything you've built. Isolara stepped forward, placing herself between Valoria and her children. I want what was stolen. My mate. My pack. My life. Your mate chose me. My mate was poisoned by your family's treachery, and these. Isolara gestured to the twins who stood fierce and unafraid behind her. Are proof that every word you spoke was a lie. Valoria's composure cracked for just a moment as her gaze found the children. Impossible. The examination was falsified. Your own healers admitted it to the council 3 years ago, before your family had them silenced. Isolara's voice carried a cold satisfaction. Did you think no one would ever find out? That your web of lies would hold forever? It doesn't matter. Valoria's expression hardened. Dead women tell no tales, and orphaned bastards have no claim to any throne. She raised her hand, and her warriors surged forward. Time slowed. Isolara felt Kale rise behind her, his weakened form struggling to expand, felt her children's hands gripping her cloak, felt the bond in her shoulder, dormant for so long, suddenly ignite with searing heat. And something inside her answered. Not healing magic. Something older. The power erupted from her chest like golden fire, slamming into the advancing warriors with concussive force. They flew backward, crashing into walls, crumpling to the ground. Isolara stared at her own hands, watching light ripple beneath her skin. What? Mama. Kaylin's voice was filled with wonder. You're like us now. Like us. The twins. The connection to Kale. The bond with Valdric that had never truly broken. 5 years of suppressed grief and rage and love had transformed into something new. Something that had been growing inside her all along, waiting for the moment she was ready to claim it. Luna. Not just a title. A power. Valoria scrambled backward, genuine fear replacing her arrogance. This isn't possible. You were nobody. Common blood. I was the woman your family deemed worthless. Isolara advanced on her, golden light swirling around her hands. I was the mother who raised her children in exile while you played queen. I was the mate who survived your poison, your lies, and your assassins. She grabbed Valoria by the throat and lifted her off the ground. And I am done being underestimated. The castle gates exploded inward. Valdric's howl shook the stones as he led the loyal wolves into the courtyard, tearing through Sylvain defenders like a force of nature. The battle was brief and brutal. 5 years of pent-up fury unleashed in a matter of minutes. When it was over, Valdric found Isolara standing over Valoria's unconscious form, the twins beside her, and Kale draped protectively around all three. It's done, Isolara said quietly. House Sylvain is finished. Valdric crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. You terrified me, he breathed against her hair. Good. Perhaps you'll think twice before doubting me again. His laugh was broken with relief. Never again. I will never doubt you again. And in the ruins of Valoria's ambition, with their children pressed between them and a shadow beast humming contentment at their feet, the true Luna of Ebonvale finally came home. The trial of House Solvane lasted 3 days. Every crime was laid bare before the assembled packs: the falsified examination, the drugging of the Alpha King, the assassination attempts, the coup. Valoria wept and raged and begged, but the evidence was overwhelming. The Elder Council's verdict was unanimous. Lord Solvane was executed for treason. Valoria was stripped of her wolf and exiled to the frozen wastelands beyond the northern border, condemned to live as the nothing she had tried to make Isolara. Fitting, Thessaly observed as they watched the disgraced woman being dragged from the great hall. She built her empire on calling you worthless. Now she gets to discover what worthlessness truly feels like. Isolara felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion, and beneath it, the first fragile stirrings of peace. The pack celebrated their true Luna's return with a fervor that overwhelmed her. Wolves who had been strangers 5 years ago wept at her feet, begging forgiveness for not fighting harder against the lies. Servants who remembered her kindness brought gifts for the twins. Warriors pledged their loyalty with a fierceness that left no doubt. But the moment Isolara treasured most came quietly, in the privacy of the royal chambers. Valdric knelt before her with something in his hands, a small box carved from moonwood, ancient and precious. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said hoarsely, "a gift for the Luna she always hoped I would find. I tried to give it to you the night of our first anniversary, but House Solvane had already begun their campaign. The drugs were clouding my mind. I forgot I even had it until I found it in my chambers 3 years later after I woke up." Isolara opened the box. Inside lay a ring, a band of silver set with a stone that shifted between amber and gold, like captured firelight. "The bond was never broken," Valdric continued, "but it was damaged. Incomplete. If you'll allow me, if you can ever truly forgive me, I want to renew it. Properly. Before the entire pack, so there can never be any doubt again." Isolara looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the future stretching out ahead. Complicated, imperfect, but real. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," she said honestly. 5 years is a long time. The wounds go deep. "I know, but I want to try. For the children, for the pack." She paused. "And for myself." She extended her hand. Valdric slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pressed his lips to her knuckles. The renewal ceremony took place under a full moon, in the same great hall where Isolara had once been shattered. But this time, she stood on the dais beside her mate, her children flanking them. Kale's massive shadow curled protectively around the entire family. When Valdric bared his throat to her, the ultimate gesture of trust from an alpha, Isolara did not hesitate. Her teeth sank into his flesh, and the bond roared to life. It was not the naive, fragile thing they had shared before. This bond was forged in suffering and separation, tempered by grief and strengthened by survival. It was a bond between equals, 2 people who had walked through fire and chosen to walk the rest of the way together. Valdric's claiming bite followed, marking her shoulder in the exact spot where the old scar had never faded. And as their souls merged through the completed bond, Isolara felt him, truly felt him, for the first time in 5 years. His remorse, endless and genuine. His love, fierce and unwavering. His commitment to spend every remaining day of his existence earning the trust she had offered. The pack howled their joy to the moon. A year passed. Ebonvale healed. The scars of Solvane treachery faded into history. Trade flourished, alliances strengthened, and the pack thrived under the leadership of an alpha who had learned humility and a Luna who had learned her own strength. Kaelin and Seraphine grew into the roles they were born for, the heir and the spare. though Isolara refused to let anyone call them that. They were simply her children, remarkable and loved, with a shadow beast companion who had become as much a fixture of castle life as the ancient tapestries. And on a warm summer evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Isolara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers with Valdric's arms wrapped around her from behind. "I've been thinking," he murmured against her hair. "Dangerous habit." He smiled, and she felt it through the bond, that warmth she had spent 5 years believing she would never experience again. "I was thinking that we should expand the family." Isolara turned in his arms, one eyebrow raised. "You do remember what happened the last time I was pregnant? The exile, the shadow beast, the near-death experiences?" "Vividly." His expression softened. "But this time, I would be there. For every moment, every craving, every mood swing, every midnight demand for strange foods." "You make it sound so appealing." "I would hold your hand through the birth. Watch our child take their first breath. Be the father I was denied the chance to be." His voice cracked slightly. "If you would give me that gift." Isolara considered him, this man who had hurt her so deeply and worked so hard to heal what was broken. The bond between them pulsed with his hope, his vulnerability, and his absolute devotion. "A third child would be chaos," she said. "We have a shadow beast. How much worse could it be?" "Kale would be insufferably smug. He already thinks he's responsible for everything good in our lives." "He's not entirely wrong." Isolara laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had taken months to rediscover. "Ask me again in the spring," she said, "when the twins have settled into their studies, and Kale has stopped trying to adopt every stray wolf that wanders through the territory." Valdric's smile was radiant with hope. "Spring it is." He kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise, while the sun set over the kingdom they had fought to reclaim. And in the great tapestry of Ebenvale's history, a new chapter was woven. The story of a Luna declared Barren who returned with twin heirs, of an Alpha who tore apart his own mind to find his true mate, of a shadow beast who defied every legend to protect a family he claimed as his own. They had survived lies and exile and war, and they had emerged stronger for all of it, together. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story, Kuno.